"You don't belong here." That's what the gate agent said right before he ripped her first-class ticket in half. What he didn't know was that the black woman standing in front of him had just signed the papers to buy his entire airline. And within 72 hours, he would be on his knees, not because she demanded it, but because the weight of his own choices finally crushed him. This isn't a revenge story. This is what happens when someone tries to steal your dignity and discovers you were never the one who needed protecting. The snow came down in soft spirals outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of Charlotte Douglas International Airport. December 30th. The kind of night when everyone in the terminal carried the same exhausted hope of getting somewhere before the calendar flipped. Families dragged overstuffed luggage across polished floors. College students shuffled in sweatpants and hoodies, earbuds blocking out the chaos around them. Business travelers stared at phones like the screens held answers to questions they'd forgotten how to ask. Children whined about hunger and boredom, while parents promised that the plane would come soon, that everything would be fine, that they just needed to wait a little longer. And in the middle of all that ordinary chaos stood Maya Carter. She was 42 years old, though most people guessed younger. Her skin was the color of dark honey smooth, except for the laugh lines around her eyes that she'd earned honestly through decades of smiling through adversity. Tonight, she wore a black wool coat that her mother had given her 5 Christmases ago, the buttons slightly worn from years of use, the collar still carrying the faint scent of her mother's perfume. She had on a pair of well-worn jeans that she'd owned since her 30s, comfortable and familiar, and boots that had walked through construction sites and corporate boardrooms with equal confidence. Her hair was pulled back in a simple twist, the way her grandmother used to wear hers. No jewelry, except a thin gold chain that had belonged to that same grandmother. The clasp slightly tarnished the pendant warm against her skin. She looked like what she was trying to be tonight. A daughter. Just a daughter trying to get home to her mama before time ran out. 3 weeks ago, Maya had been sitting in a glass-walled conference room on the 47th floor of a Manhattan skyscraper. The view of Central Park stretched out below like a painting, the bare trees forming intricate patterns against the gray December sky. Lawyers in expensive suits sat on one side of the long mahogany table. Investment bankers with silver hair and knowing smiles sat on the other. Documents were stacked so high in front of her that she could barely see the faces across from her each page, representing months of negotiation, years of planning, a lifetime of preparation. She had signed her name 14 times that afternoon, each signature transferring another piece of Horizon Airlines into her ownership. The regional carrier had been struggling for years, bleeding money and customers to bigger competitors who could afford to undercut prices and oversaturate routes. Most investors saw a dying company. Maya saw what others missed. Potential hiding beneath the surface. Routes that connected small cities. The major airlines had abandoned cities where people still needed to travel for funerals and weddings and job interviews and all the moments that make up a human life. A workforce that still believed in service, still remembered when flying meant something. A brand that had been tarnished but could be polished back to brilliance with the right care. The deal closed at 4:47 p.m. Eastern Time. By 4:48 p.m., champagne corks were popping and lawyers were shaking hands, and everyone in the room was congratulating themselves on a transaction well executed. By 4:52 p.m., Maya's phone had buzzed with a text from her mother's oncologist. "Call me when you can. It's about Evelyn." Maya had excused herself from the celebration, her smile never wavering, her voice steady, as she explained that she needed to take an important call. She walked down the hall to the bathroom, her heels clicking against the marble floor, each step feeling heavier than the last. She locked the door behind her, leaned against the cool tile wall, and dialed Dr. Patterson's number with fingers that had suddenly forgotten how to stop shaking. The conversation lasted 4 minutes. Stage 4. Spread to the lymph nodes and liver. The treatments they had been trying weren't working anymore. Maybe 6 months, probably less. Dr. Patterson's voice was kind but clinical, the voice of a man who had delivered this news too many times to count, who had learned to separate himself from the weight of the words he spoke. Maya had cried for exactly 4 minutes after hanging up. She allowed herself that. 4 minutes of tears streaming down her face. 4 minutes of silent sobbing. 4 minutes of feeling the world crack open beneath her feet. Then she washed her face with cold water, reapplied her lipstick with steady hands, and returned to the conference room with a smile that fooled everyone except herself. That was 3 weeks ago. Tonight she wasn't a CEO. She wasn't the woman whose face had appeared in Forbes and Black Enterprise and the Wall Street Journal. She wasn't the person who had just acquired a struggling airline for $300 million. She wasn't the businesswoman who had built an empire from nothing, who had turned a small hospitality company into a nationwide brand, who had proven wrong everyone who had ever told her that a black girl from Atlanta couldn't make it in the world of high finance. Tonight, she was Evelyn Carter's only child, and she was trying to get home for what might be their last New Year's Eve together. The first-class check-in line was short, 3 people ahead of her. A white man in a cashmere overcoat who looked like he owned several small countries, his silver hair perfectly styled, his posture radiating the casual confidence of inherited wealth. A woman with a Louis Vuitton carry-on that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, her fingers adorned with diamonds that caught the fluorescent light. A teenager in designer sneakers who was completely absorbed in his phone, his thumbs moving across the screen with the practiced speed of his generation. Maya took her place behind them, her modest rolling suitcase at her side, her ticket confirmation pulled up on her phone. She had purchased the ticket herself using her personal credit card, the same card she had used for 20 years. She had chosen the window seat because she liked watching the world shrink beneath her as planes climbed into the sky. She had packed light because she didn't know how long she would be staying, didn't know if this would be a visit of days or weeks, or the final goodbye she had been dreading since Dr. Patterson's call. That's when she noticed him. The gate agent behind the counter was white, mid-30s, with sandy hair that was starting to thin at the temples, and the kind of jawline that suggested he'd been handsome once before, whatever bitterness had settled into the lines around his mouth. His eyes were the color of dirty ice, pale and cold, constantly scanning the passengers in front of him, with an expression that hovered somewhere between boredom and contempt. His name tag read Derek Walsh. Senior Gate Agent. He wore his uniform like armor, every crease sharp, every button gleaming, his tie knotted with military precision. Maya watched as he processed the man in the cashmere coat. The smile Derek gave him was warm, almost deferential, the kind of smile people reserve for those they consider their superiors. "Good evening, sir. Let me just pull up your reservation," he typed quickly, efficiently. "I see you're in seat 2A tonight. Excellent choice. Would you like me to upgrade you to our premium first-class option?" Complimentary, of course, as a thank you for your loyalty to Horizon Airlines. The man accepted with a nod, barely acknowledging the gift, and Derek wished him a pleasant flight with a sincerity that seemed almost genuine. The woman with the Louis Vuitton received the same treatment. Efficient, respectful, professional. Derek complimented her luggage, asked about her destination, expressed hope that she would have a wonderful new year. His smile never wavered, his tone never shifted, his entire demeanor radiating the kind of customer service that training manuals dream about. The teenager was processed with polite efficiency, Derek even making a joke about young people and their phones that earned a reluctant smile. But when Maya stepped up to the counter, something shifted. It was subtle at first. So subtle that someone not paying attention might have missed it entirely. A slight narrowing of the eyes, barely perceptible, like someone adjusting to an unexpected light. An almost imperceptible tightening of the jaw, the muscles beneath his clean-shaven skin tensing for just a fraction of a second. The smile remained, but it had transformed into something else entirely. The kind of smile people wear when they're performing politeness rather than feeling it. The kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. "Can I help you?" Derek asked, and the inflection on the word "you" carried a weight that Maya had learned to recognize a long time ago. It was the vocal equivalent of looking someone up and down and finding them wanting. It was the sound of judgment rendered before a single piece of evidence had been presented. "Yes, thank you." Maya kept her voice pleasant, professional. The voice she had perfected over decades of navigating spaces where people looked at her and saw only her skin color. "I need to check in for flight 745 to Atlanta. First class." Derek's eyebrows rose by approximately 2 millimeters. Such a small movement, such a large statement. It was the expression of someone who has just been told something they find difficult to believe, the facial equivalent of saying, "Are you sure about that?" without actually speaking the words. He extended his hand for her ID and boarding pass, and Maya handed them over, watching as his eyes moved from the documents to her face and back again. Once, twice, 3 times. Each glance carrying its own silent question. Each comparison between the name on the ticket and the woman standing in front of him revealing something about the assumptions he had already made. "This ticket," he said, slowly drawing out each word as if speaking to someone who might have difficulty understanding, was purchased. How exactly Maya felt the first flicker of something hot in her chest. A spark of anger that she had learned long ago to keep carefully banked. She had been dealing with men like Derek Walsh her entire adult life. Men who looked at her and saw only her skin color. Men who assumed that a black woman in the first-class line must be lost, confused, or fraudulent. Men who couldn't imagine that someone who looked like her could afford the same luxuries they took for granted. She had learned through painful experience that losing her temper only gave them what they wanted. Confirmation of their assumptions. Justification for their prejudice. Fuel for the narrative they had already written in their heads. "With a credit card," she said simply. "Is there a problem?" Derek didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned to his computer typing with a deliberate slowness that felt designed to irritate, each keystroke a tiny assertion of power. The seconds stretched into minutes. Maya could see other passengers in her peripheral vision. The man in cashmere was long gone, already settled into his upgraded seat, probably ordering a pre-flight scotch. The Louis Vuitton woman had disappeared toward the departure gate, her heels clicking confidently against the polished floor. But behind Maya, a small line was beginning to form. A family with 2 children who looked exhausted, the parents exchanging worried glances as they checked their watches. An elderly black couple holding hands, the woman's hair silver beneath a beautiful silk scarf, the man wearing a veteran's cap that identified him as having served in Vietnam. A young white man in a military uniform, his service ribbons catching the fluorescent light, his posture straight, despite the weariness in his eyes. The silence stretched. Derek's fingers stopped moving on the keyboard. He stared at the screen for a long moment, his expression shifting through a series of micro-expressions that Maya cataloged automatically. Confusion, then skepticism, then something that looked almost like satisfaction. When he turned back to Maya, his face had hardened into something approaching professional concern, the mask of someone about to deliver bad news they secretly enjoy delivering. "I'm going to need you to step aside, ma'am." Maya didn't move. Her feet stayed planted on the polished floor, her hands stayed relaxed at her sides, her expression stayed neutral. "Why, we need to verify some information about your ticket purchase." Derek's voice carried the tone of someone reciting from a script they'd memorized long ago. "There have been some incidents lately with fraudulent first-class bookings. I'm sure you understand." The hot flicker in Maya's chest grew warmer, but her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory, as clear as if the old woman were standing beside her. "When they try to make you small, Maya Bell, you just remember who you are. You remember who your people are. You remember what we survived to get you here. And don't you ever let them see you bend." "No." Maya replied, her voice calm but firm. "I don't understand. I've been flying first class for 20 years. I've used this airline dozens of times. I have never once been asked to step aside for verification. So I'm asking you directly, Officer Walsh. Why me?" Derek's smile disappeared entirely. The mask of professionalism slipped, revealing something uglier beneath. His eyes narrowed, his jaw tightened, and his voice dropped to a register that was meant to intimidate. "Ma'am, I'm going to ask you one more time. Please step aside so we can verify your purchase. This is standard protocol." Maya looked past him to where another gate agent was processing a white man who had just walked up to an adjacent counter. The man was wearing jeans and a wrinkled polo shirt, nothing about his appearance suggesting wealth or status. Yet the agent greeted him with a warm smile, processed his ticket without a single question, and wished him a pleasant flight within 30 seconds of his arrival. No questions asked, no verification required, no suspicious glances or deliberate delays. She looked back at Derek. "Is that gentleman being asked to verify his purchase?" Derek's face flushed a deep red creeping up from his collar. "That's not relevant. I'm asking about your ticket. It seems very relevant to me." Maya kept her voice conversational, almost pleasant, the tone of someone discussing the weather or comparing notes on a shared experience. "You're telling me this is standard protocol. So, I'm asking a simple question. Is this protocol being applied equally to every first-class passenger tonight? Or just to me?" The family behind her had gone quiet. Maya could feel their eyes on her back, could sense the shift in the atmosphere that happens when a routine transaction transforms into something else, something that carries the weight of history, something that touches nerves that are always raw, always waiting to be struck. Derek leaned forward, lowering his voice to something between a whisper and a hiss. "Look, I don't want any trouble here, but I've got a job to do. And that job includes making sure that every passenger in this line has a legitimate ticket. So you can either cooperate with my request, or I can call security. Your choice. Maya considered her options. She could demand to speak with a supervisor, but Derek had already positioned himself as the authority in this situation. She could call her lawyer, but that would take hours, and she would miss her flight. She could reveal who she was, the new owner of this very airline, and watch Derek's face collapse in horror. She could feel the power of that revelation waiting on her tongue, ready to be deployed like a weapon. But that wasn't who she was. That wasn't who her grandmother had raised her to be. Lillian Carter had spent 40 years cleaning hotel rooms, dealing with guests who looked through her like she was part of the furniture, and she had never once responded with cruelty. She had responded with dignity, with grace, with the quiet certainty that her worth was not determined by how others treated her. "Fine," Maya said quietly. "I'll step aside." She moved to the side of the counter, her suitcase beside her, her hands folded in front of her body, her spine straight as a ruler. The family behind her moved forward, and Derek processed them with warm efficiency, complimenting the children on their patience, wishing them a wonderful holiday. The military man stepped up, and Derek thanked him for his service with what appeared to be genuine respect, upgrading his seat without being asked. The elderly black couple approached, and Derek's demeanor shifted again, becoming colder, more suspicious, the warmth draining from his voice, like water from a sink. He asked them for additional identification, questioned their connecting flight, made them wait while he supposedly verified their reservation. The woman's hands trembled slightly as she produced document after document, each one examined with theatrical thoroughness. The man's jaw was set in an expression that Maya recognized instantly. The expression of someone who has faced this kind of treatment so many times that he no longer expects anything different, but still feels the sting every single time. Maya watched all of this, cataloging every detail, every microaggression, every small cruelty. She noticed a young man in a Horizon Airlines uniform hovering near the edge of the counter, his posture uncertain, his eyes troubled. His name tag read Marcus Chen. He was maybe 28 or 29, with the slightly nervous energy of someone new to the job, someone who hadn't yet learned to look the other way. His eyes kept darting between Derek and Maya, between the elderly couple, and the line of passengers growing ever longer, his expression cycling through confusion, discomfort, and something that looked like the early stages of moral distress. Derek Marcus said quietly, stepping closer to his colleague, his voice pitched low enough that only those immediately nearby could hear. "That woman's been waiting for almost 15 minutes. Is everything okay with her ticket?" Derek didn't look up from his computer. "Everything's fine, just doing my due diligence. Busy night. Can't be too careful with these fraud attempts." Marcus glanced at Maya. She met his eyes, and in that brief moment of connection, she saw something she recognized. The look of someone who knows that something is wrong, but isn't sure they have the authority to fix it. The look of someone caught between their conscience and their paycheck, between what they know is right and what they fear might cost them. She gave him a small nod. A release. A permission to stand down. She didn't need him to fight her battles. She had been fighting them alone for a long time. He looked away, his shoulders slumping slightly, and she didn't blame him. She had been 28 once. She had stood in rooms where she knew wrong things were happening, and had said nothing because she was afraid. It had taken her years to find her voice. She couldn't expect him to find his in a single moment. At the 20-minute mark, Derek finally approached her. His stride was confident, almost cocky, the walk of a man who believes himself to be completely in control of a situation. He held her ID and boarding pass in his hand, and there was something in the set of his shoulders, in the slight upturn of his lips, that told Maya exactly what was coming before he opened his mouth. "Ma'am." His voice carried across the counter, loud enough for others to hear, loud enough to make a point. "I've run your card through our secondary verification system multiple times. Each time it's been declined." Maya's eyebrows rose. "That's impossible. That card has a $50,000 limit, and I've used less than $3,000 this month. I used it yesterday to buy groceries without any issues. There is nothing wrong with that card." Derek shrugged elaborately, his palms turning upward in a gesture of helplessness that didn't match the satisfaction in his eyes. "I don't know what to tell you. The system is the system. If your card can't be verified through our security protocols, I can't let you board this aircraft. There are rules for a reason, ma'am. I'm just following them. Then run it again." Maya pulled out her phone. "Better yet, let me call my bank right now. We can verify the transaction together in real time, and you can watch the confirmation come through on your screen. If there's genuinely an issue with my account, my bank will be able to tell us immediately." Derek's expression shifted, becoming almost gleeful. The smile of someone who has been waiting for an opportunity and finally sees it approaching. "Ma'am, you can't use your phone in this area during an active security verification. Airline policy. I'm going to have to ask you to put that away." Maya stared at him. "This is a customer service counter, not a TSA checkpoint. There's no security verification happening here. You're simply processing a check-in, and there is no airline policy that prevents passengers from using their phones at the counter. I've made calls from this exact spot dozens of times over the years." Something flickered in Derek's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, that she knew enough to call his bluff. That she wasn't backing down, wasn't apologizing, wasn't doing any of the things he expected her to do. But the surprise was quickly replaced by something harder. Something that had been building all night, maybe longer. Something that had nothing to do with airline policy, and everything to do with the assumptions he had made the moment she stepped up to his counter. "Look," he said, stepping closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper, low enough that only Maya could hear. "I've tried to be patient with you. I've given you every opportunity to cooperate. I've been more than fair, but you want to make this into a situation. Fine. We can do a situation." He held up her boarding pass, the paper trembling slightly in his grip, though whether from anger or anticipation she couldn't tell. Maya saw what was coming. She could have stopped it. Could have grabbed his wrist, could have called out, could have done any number of things to prevent what happened next. She could have revealed her identity, spoken the words that would have frozen him in his tracks. But she didn't. Because somewhere deep inside her, in the place where her grandmother's wisdom lived, she understood that some lessons can only be taught through their full expression. Some evils can only be confronted when they're allowed to show their true face. Some people will never believe what you tell them. They will only believe what they see. Derek tore the ticket in half. The sound was louder than it should have been. A sharp, decisive rip that silenced everything around it, that cut through the ambient noise of the terminal like a knife through silk. The two pieces of paper fluttered to the floor, landing at Maya's feet, like fallen leaves, like the broken wings of a bird that would never fly again. And then Derek spoke, and his words detonated in the silence of the terminal like a bomb that had been waiting years to explode. People like you shouldn't even be in this line. First class is for people who actually belong here, people who earned it. Maybe try Greyhound next time. That's more your speed. Behind him, someone gasped. A child asked their mother what was happening, the innocent confusion in their voice cutting through the tension. The elderly black man in the veteran's cap stood frozen, his eyes wet with something that looked like old pain, newly awakened, like memories of 100 similar moments stretching back across decades. His wife clutched his arm, her face a mask of tired recognition. A woman in a business suit had her phone out recording. A teenager was typing furiously, probably already posting to social media. The family with the exhausted children stood in horrified silence, the mother covering her daughter's ears, as if she could protect her from the ugliness that had just been spoken aloud. And Maya stood perfectly still, her hand finding its way to her coat pocket, where a small piece of fabric waited for her touch. The handkerchief had been white once. Now it was the color of old ivory, softened by decades of handling, worn thin in places, from being clutched and folded and pressed against tear-stained cheeks. The embroidery in the corner was still visible delicate blue thread, spelling out 3 letters in a script that had gone out of fashion 50 years ago. GLC. Grandma Lillian Carter. Maya wrapped her fingers around it, feeling the familiar texture against her palm, and let herself breathe. Lillian Carter had been born in 1932 in a small town in Georgia where the water fountains were still labeled, and the back of the bus was the only place a black woman could sit. She had grown up in the shadow of Jim Crow, had learned to make herself small and invisible, had survived by knowing which rules could be bent and which ones would get you killed. She had moved to Atlanta at 18, had worked as a maid in hotels for 40 years, had raised 4 children on minimum wage, while her husband worked double shifts at the factory just to keep the lights on. She had given Maya this handkerchief on a summer afternoon in 1989, when 7-year-old Maya Bell had come home from school crying because a boy in her class told her that black people couldn't be doctors, that they weren't smart enough, that they should just be grateful they let them go to school at all. Lillian had sat her granddaughter down at the kitchen table, the one with the wobbly leg that they never could afford to fix, and she had pressed this handkerchief into Maya's small hands. "You keep this with you, Maya Bell," she had said, her voice carrying the weight of generations. "Whenever the world tries to make you feel small, you hold on to this. And you remember that you're holding all the strength of all the women who came before you, all the ones who survived things worse than a mean boy's words, all the ones who kept going when everything told them to stop, all the ones who loved you before you were even born." Lillian had died when Maya was 16, slipping away quietly in her sleep after a lifetime of work that had worn her body down but never touched her spirit. Maya had carried the handkerchief every day since, through college, where she was often the only black face in her classes, through business school, where professors questioned whether she had really earned her grades, through every boardroom negotiation and every skeptical investor meeting and every moment when someone looked at her and saw only her skin color. And now, standing in an airport terminal with the torn pieces of her boarding pass at her feet, she held it again. Around her, the terminal had erupted into chaos. People were pulling out their phones, recording from multiple angles. Others were shouting at Derek, demanding to know what he thought he was doing, threatening to report him using words that Maya herself would never say. A woman in a red blazer was already on the phone with what sounded like a news station, her voice sharp and urgent. The elderly couple that Derek had harassed earlier stood together, the woman crying quietly into her husband's chest. The man's jaw set in an expression of weary recognition, the look of someone who has seen this play out 1,000 times and knows exactly how it ends. Derek seemed to notice the attention for the first time. His confident posture shifted, uncertainty flickering across his features before he squared his shoulders and reasserted his authority. He straightened his uniform, adjusted his tie, and addressed the gathering crowd with the voice of someone who believes themselves to be completely justified. "Flight security is my responsibility," he announced loudly, his voice carrying across the terminal. "I won't apologize for doing my job. If someone can't verify their purchase through proper channels, they don't get to fly. Simple as that. This is about keeping everyone safe. This is about following the rules." A few people in the crowd nodded. A white man in a golf shirt actually clapped a single sharp sound of approval that echoed off the high ceiling. A woman muttered something about being glad someone was finally doing something about fraud. Derek's smile widened, feeding off the validation. And then, Janet Morrison stepped out of the crowd. She was 58 years old, with silver streaks running through her close-cropped natural hair and the kind of bearing that came from 25 years of watching people at their worst and their best. Her face was weathered but strong, the face of a woman who had spent her life on her feet, who had worked her way up from nothing, who knew the difference between real authority and the performance of it. Her uniform identified her as airport security, but the way she moved suggested something more. A quiet authority that had nothing to do with the badge on her chest. She had been watching the entire confrontation from 30 feet away, her hand resting on her radio but never touching the call button. She had seen Derek's posture, heard his tone, watched the way he treated the black passengers differently from the white ones. She had seen the patterns play out 100 times before, had filed reports that went nowhere, had swallowed her anger, and done her job because that was what you did when you wanted to keep your job. But when Derek tore that ticket, something in her had shifted from observation to action. Ma'am Janet said, her voice calm and professional as she approached Maya. "I'm going to need you to come with me." Maya looked at her, looked at the badge, looked at the face behind the badge with its careful neutrality and watchful eyes. "Am I being detained? No, ma'am. But I think you might be more comfortable continuing this conversation somewhere private. Would you please follow me?" Maya bent down and picked up the two halves of her boarding pass, moving slowly, deliberately, making sure that everyone watching could see exactly what she was doing. She folded them carefully, placing them in her pocket next to the handkerchief. Then she straightened, collected her suitcase, and followed Janet toward a hallway that led away from the main terminal. Behind her, Derek called out his voice, carrying across the now buzzing check-in area. "Happy New Year! Don't forget to try the bus station next time." Scattered laughter. The sound of a man who believed he had won. Maya didn't turn around. She just kept walking, her spine straight, her head high, her grandmother's handkerchief warm against her heart. The hallway Janet led her through was quiet, insulated from the chaos of the terminal by thick walls and heavy doors. Their footsteps echoed on the polished floor, creating a rhythm that felt almost meditative. Janet didn't speak until they had turned two corners and stopped in front of a door marked VIP Services. "In here, ma'am," Maya hesitated. She had expected to be taken to a security office, expected to face more questions, more suspicion, more of the same treatment she had just endured. Expected to spend the next several hours explaining herself, defending herself, proving herself to people who had already made up their minds about who she was. But this door didn't lead to an interrogation room. It led to a comfortable lounge with leather chairs and soft lighting, and a window that looked out over the tarmac, where planes were being prepared for their journeys into the night sky. A small bar sat in one corner, stocked with bottles that probably cost more than most people's weekly groceries. Fresh flowers arranged in a crystal vase filled the air with the subtle scent of lilies. Janet closed the door behind them. For a long moment, neither woman spoke. The silence stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people taking each other's measure, deciding how much to trust, how much to reveal. Then Janet said, her voice dropping its professional veneer to reveal something warmer beneath. "I've worked this airport for 25 years, Ms. Carter. I started as a baggage handler when I was 33 years old. Single mother, 2 kids, no college degree. Just a willingness to work harder than anyone else, and a refusal to give up." She walked to the window, looking out at the planes, their lights blinking in the darkness. "I've worked my way up through every department in this airport. Baggage, maintenance, customer service, security. I've seen a lot of things in that time. Good things, bad things, things that made me proud of humanity, and things that made me ashamed to be part of it." She turned to face Maya, her expression shifting from professional neutrality to something more personal. "What I saw out there tonight was wrong, and I need you to know that I know who you are." Maya's expression didn't change. "You recognize me?" Janet nodded. "I read Aviation Weekly on my lunch breaks. Have for years. Old habit from when I used to dream about being a pilot back when I was young and stupid enough to think that dream was possible." She smiled slightly at the memory. "Last month's issue had a piece about Horizon Airlines being acquired by Carter Hospitality Group. Didn't make the front page, but I pay attention to industry news. The photo they ran was small, and you were wearing a suit instead of that coat. Your hair was different, but I recognize your face." Maya sat down in one of the leather chairs, suddenly feeling the weight of the last 20 minutes pressing down on her. The adrenaline that had kept her standing kept her composed, kept her spine straight in the face of Derek's cruelty, was beginning to fade, leaving exhaustion in its wake. "How many other people know about the acquisition?" "Almost nobody. The official announcement isn't until January 2nd. Your legal team did a good job keeping it quiet." Janet sat down across from her. "But that's not really the question you're asking, is it no?" Maya's voice was quiet, thoughtful. "The question I'm asking is why you brought me here, instead of just letting it play out. Why you intervened when you could have looked the other way like everyone else." Janet was silent for a moment, her eyes distant, as if looking at something far beyond the walls of this room. "Because I've watched men like Derek Walsh operate for my entire career. I've seen the complaints pile up and get dismissed. I've seen the patterns that everyone pretends not to notice. I've seen good people get hurt and bad people get protected, and I've spent 25 years telling myself that there wasn't anything I could do about it, that I was just one person, that I didn't have enough power to make a difference, that speaking up would only get me fired, and then who would take care of my kids?" She leaned forward, her hands clasped between her knees. "Tonight, I decided that was a lie. I wasn't willing to tell myself anymore. My kids are grown now. They have their own lives. And I realized that I've been using them as an excuse for a long time. The truth is, I was afraid. I'm still afraid. But I'm more tired of being afraid than I am of facing the consequences. Maya studied the woman in front of her, the tired eyes that had seen too much, the set jaw that spoke of determination forged in fire, the hands that were clasped together tightly like she was holding on to something she was afraid to let go. "What's your name?" "Janet Morrison." "Janet." Maya reached into her pocket and pulled out the handkerchief, unfolding it, so Janet could see the embroidered initials. "Do you know what this is?" Janet looked at the fabric, at the delicate letters, at the yellowed linen that had clearly been treasured for decades. "Looks old." "Family heirloom. My grandmother gave it to me when I was 7 years old." Maya ran her thumb over the embroidery, feeling the raised threads beneath her skin. Lillian Carter. She worked as a maid at the Radisson in Atlanta for 40 years. Never missed a day, not even when she was sick, not even when her back hurt so badly she could barely stand. Never complained. Raised 4 children on minimum wage while her husband worked 2 jobs just to keep the lights on. Never owned a house. Never took a vacation. Never saw any of her children graduate from college because she was always working. She looked up at Janet. "When I was 7, I came home from school crying because a boy in my class told me that black people couldn't be doctors, that we weren't smart enough, that we should just be grateful they let us go to school at all." Maya's voice was steady, but there was something underneath it. Something that had been building for 35 years. My grandmother sat me down at her kitchen table, the one with the wobbly leg, and gave me this handkerchief. She told me to keep it with me whenever the world tried to make me feel small. She said that when I held it, I was holding all the strength of all the women who came before me, all the ones who survived things worse than a mean boy's words, all the ones who picked cotton and scrubbed floors and raised other people's children while their own waited at home, all the ones who loved me before I was even born. Janet nodded slowly, her eyes glistening. Sounds like a wise woman. She was. Maya refolded the handkerchief carefully. She died when I was 16. Cancer. Caught too late because she never had time to see a doctor when she was healthy, only when she was already too sick for them to help. I've carried this with me every day since, through college, through business school, through every board meeting and negotiation, and moment when someone looked at me and saw only my skin color. She paused. And tonight, when that man tore up my ticket, I wanted to destroy him. I wanted to tell him exactly who I was and watch his face when he realized what he'd done. I wanted to use every bit of power I have to end his career, his reputation, his entire life. I wanted to make him feel as small as he tried to make me feel. Why didn't you, Maya, met Janet's eyes? Because that's not what my grandmother taught me. She didn't teach me to destroy people. She taught me to build things, to create change that lasts longer than any single act of revenge. She taught me that anyone can tear something down, but it takes real strength to build something up. Janet was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked, "What are you going to do?" Maya stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the planes on the tarmac. The same planes that bore the Horizon Airlines logo. The same planes that she now owned, that she was responsible for, that carried thousands of people every day to the places where their lives happened. "First, I'm going to make a phone call," she said. "Then I'm going to have a conversation with Mr. Walsh. And then I'm going to change some things. Not just for me. For everyone who's ever stood in a line like that and been made to feel like they don't belong. For everyone whose complaint was dismissed. For everyone who swallowed their anger and walked away because they didn't have the power to do anything else. She pulled out her phone. But I need to know something first, Janet. Are you willing to be part of this? Because what I'm about to do is going to make waves. Big ones. And some of those waves might wash back on you. You've got 25 years invested in this airport. A pension. Benefits. Security. I'm asking you to put all of that at risk. Janet stood up, her posture, straightening something, changing in her bearing. Ms. Carter, I've spent 25 years watching things I knew were wrong, and telling myself it wasn't my place to speak up. I've seen good people get crushed by bad systems, and I've kept my head down because I was scared. She walked over to stand beside Maya at the window. My grandmother cleaned houses too. Different city, same story. She died with nothing, just like yours probably did. And my whole life I've been telling myself that I was doing better, that I was making progress, that each generation gets a little further than the last. She turned to face Maya directly. But tonight I realized that progress isn't automatic. It doesn't happen just because time passes. It happens because people fight for it. Because people put themselves at risk. Because people decide that their fear is less important than their conscience. She took a deep breath. If you're offering me a chance to finally do something that matters, I'm not going to waste it. Whatever comes, I'll deal with it. Maya nodded once. Then let's begin. She dialed a number from memory. It rang twice before a woman's voice answered, crisp and professional despite the late hour. This is Olivia Thornton. Olivia, this is Maya Carter. I need you at Charlotte Douglas Airport as soon as possible. How quickly can you get here? A pause on the other end, the sound of papers rustling, a chair creaking as someone sat up straighter. Ms. Carter, I'm at our regional office in Charlotte right now, actually. End-of-year paperwork. Board meeting prep. I can be there in 20 minutes. Is everything all right? Maya watched a plane lift off into the darkness, its lights disappearing into the snow-speckled sky, carrying people toward their futures. No, but it's about to be. Bring Harold Patterson from HR, and bring someone to take notes. This is going to be a long night. She ended the call and turned to Janet. While we wait, I want you to tell me everything you know about Derek Walsh. Every complaint, every incident, every pattern you've observed. I want to understand exactly what we're dealing with. Janet nodded and began to talk. The next 23 minutes felt like hours. Maya sat in the VIP lounge with Janet, listening as the security officer recounted story after story. The Nigerian diplomat who had been detained for 2 hours on suspicion of visa fraud, despite carrying valid documentation and diplomatic credentials. The Mexican-American businessman who had been asked to prove he spoke English fluently enough to fly first class. The black grandmother flying to her grandson's college graduation, who had been subjected to an invasive search because Derek thought her carry-on looked suspicious. There were more. So many more. Stories that had never been formally documented because the victims didn't think anyone would believe them. Stories that had been reported but dismissed. Stories that had been buried under layers of bureaucracy and indifference. Maya used the time to pull up Derek Walsh's employee file on her phone. The file she now had access to as the owner of Horizon Airlines. What she found made her stomach turn. Derek had been with the company for 6 years. In that time, there had been 7 formal complaints against him, all from passengers of color, all describing similar patterns of behavior, excessive verification requests, hostile questioning, condescending treatment, demands for additional documentation that other passengers were never asked to provide. And all 7 complaints had been dismissed without investigation, each one marked with the same notation in the same bureaucratic font. Insufficient evidence. Employee counseled. 7 complaints. 7 black and brown faces who had been humiliated, dismissed, and forgotten. 7 people whose experiences had been filed away and ignored, while Derek Walsh continued to wear his uniform like a weapon, continued to guard the first-class line like a castle gate, continued to decide who belonged and who didn't, based on nothing more than the color of their skin. Maya scrolled through the details of each complaint, reading every word, memorizing every name. Maria Santos, James Washington, Dr. Oluwole Adeyemi, Patricia Huang, Clarence Johnson, Aisha Mohammed, Robert and Dolores Freeman. 7 names, 7 stories, 7 people who had stood where she stood and experienced what she experienced. And now, an 8th story. Hers. Janet watched her read her own expression, growing darker with each passing minute. How many, Janet finally asked. 7 before tonight. Maya set down her phone. All dismissed. All forgotten. All buried under a system designed to protect employees like Derek Walsh at the expense of the passengers he's been abusing for 6 years. Janet shook her head slowly. I knew it was bad. I'd seen pieces of it. But I didn't know it was documented. I didn't know there was a paper trail that someone chose to ignore. There's always a paper trail, Maya said. The question is whether anyone bothers to read it. A knock at the door interrupted them. Janet crossed the room and opened it to reveal Olivia Thornton. Olivia was 45 years old, with steel gray hair cut in a precise bob, and the kind of presence that made people straighten their posture without knowing why. She had been with Horizon Airlines for 12 years, working her way up from regional manager to chief operating officer through a combination of competence, determination, and a refusal to accept anything less than excellence. When Maya had acquired the company, she had kept Olivia on specifically because of her reputation for integrity. Because everyone she spoke to, every industry insider and employee and competitor, had said the same thing: Olivia Thornton doesn't play games. Olivia Thornton does what's right. Behind Olivia stood Harold Patterson, the VP of Human Resources, looking rumpled and worried in a hastily buttoned shirt. His tie was crooked. His hair was disheveled. He had clearly been pulled away from something personal, and the look on his face suggested he knew this was not going to be a pleasant conversation. And behind him, a young woman with a tablet and the focused expression of someone prepared to document everything. Ms. Carter. Olivia's voice was carefully controlled, but Maya could see the concern in her eyes. What's happened? Maya stood up from her chair. Come in, all of you, and close the door. They filed in, arranging themselves around the room. Olivia remained standing, her posture alert, her eyes taking in every detail. Harold sank into one of the leather chairs, already sweating despite the cool air. The young woman positioned herself in a corner, her tablet ready. Maya didn't waste time with pleasantries. 23 minutes ago, one of your employees tore up my boarding pass in front of dozens of witnesses. She let that sink in. Before that, he made me wait for 20 minutes while he processed every other passenger in the first-class line. He accused me of fraud. He refused to let me verify my card with my bank. And when he tore my ticket, he told me that people like me don't belong in first class. He suggested I try the bus station instead. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the 2 halves of her boarding pass, laying them on the table between them like evidence in a trial. His name is Derek Walsh, senior gate agent. And according to his employee file, this isn't the first time he's done something like this. It's the 8th. Olivia's face had gone pale, the color draining from her cheeks as the implications of what Maya was saying began to sink in. She looked at the torn ticket, then back at Maya, then at the ticket again, as if hoping that a second look would reveal something different. "Ms. Carter, I am so sorry. This is completely unacceptable. I'll personally ensure that Mr. Walsh is terminated immediately and that you receive a full apology from the company. We'll issue a statement. Maya held up a hand. "I'm not finished." Olivia fell silent. "Derek Walsh has 7 prior complaints in his file." Maya continued. "All from passengers of color, all dismissed without investigation. 7 people who were treated the way I was treated tonight, and nothing happened. No consequences, no accountability, no change. The same notation on every single one. Insufficient evidence. Employee counseled. As if counseling a man like Derek Walsh has ever changed anything." Harold shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Ms. Carter, I can assure you that our complaint review process, your complaint review process is broken." Maya's voice was sharp, cutting through his excuse like a blade. "It's designed to protect employees like Derek Walsh, not the passengers he's been abusing for 6 years. It's designed to minimize liability and avoid confrontation and sweep problems under the rug until they go away. And that's going to change. Tonight." She turned to face Olivia directly. "I want Derek Walsh brought here, not to arrest him, not to fire him in front of witnesses. I want to talk to him. I want to understand how someone gets to the point where they can tear up another human being's dignity and think they're the hero of the story. I want to see his face when he learns who I am, and I want to give him a chance to explain himself before we determine what happens next." Olivia hesitated, her years of corporate training warring with her sense of urgency. Carter, with respect, that might not be the best approach. The legal exposure alone. "Our counsel would advise, I'm not asking for your counsel's advice, Olivia. I'm asking for your cooperation." Maya's voice was calm, but there was steel underneath it. "I own this company. I make the decisions about how we handle situations like this. And I've decided that I want to speak with Derek Walsh before we determine the appropriate consequences for his actions." The room was silent. Then Olivia nodded once, her professional mask settling back into place. "I'll have him brought here immediately." She stepped out of the room, already speaking into her phone. Harold remained in his chair, looking like he wished he could sink through the floor and disappear entirely. The young woman with the tablet typed, furiously documenting every word. Janet Morrison stood by the window, watching Maya with an expression that was hard to read, a mixture of respect and curiosity, and something that looked almost like hope. "You're not going to fire him," Janet said quietly once the others were out of earshot. "Are you?" Maya turned to face her. "I haven't decided yet, but I've learned that the most important decisions are the ones you make after you've gathered all the information, not before. I've learned that anger makes for satisfying choices, but rarely for wise ones. And if he can't be changed, Maya was quiet for a moment. "Then everyone will know that we gave him the chance, and that will matter. Maybe not to him, but it will matter to the people watching. It will matter to the next person who has to make this kind of decision." 12 minutes later, the door opened, and Derek Walsh walked into the room. He looked different now than he had behind the counter, smaller somehow, diminished. His uniform was still crisp, his posture still straight, but there was something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. A flicker of uncertainty, a crack in the armor. The confidence that had allowed him to tear up a stranger's ticket and mock her in front of dozens of witnesses was still there, but it was wavering, undermined by the realization that something unusual was happening. He had been told only that there was an incident requiring his presence. He had not been told who was waiting for him. Olivia Thornton walked in behind him, her face carefully neutral. She positioned herself near the door, watching. Derek's gaze swept the room. He saw Harold Patterson, the HR executive, and some of the color drained from his face. He saw Janet Morrison in her security uniform and frowned, slightly confused. He saw the young woman with the tablet and the older woman in the charcoal pantsuit who radiated authority. And then he saw Maya. For a fraction of a second, genuine confusion crossed his features. What was she doing here? The woman he had just humiliated, standing in a VIP lounge with company executives. The woman whose ticket he had torn in half, whose dignity he had trampled, whose humanity he had denied. Then Olivia spoke, and everything changed, Mr. Walsh. "I'd like to introduce you to Maya Carter." She paused, letting the name hang in the air. "The new owner of Horizon Airlines." Derek's face went through a series of transformations that would have been fascinating to watch if they weren't so predictable. Confusion first, the expression of someone who has heard words that don't make sense together. Then disbelief, the automatic rejection of information that threatens one's understanding of reality. Then recognition, the horrible moment when the truth begins to penetrate the walls of denial. And finally, a dawning horror that spread across his features like ice water, freezing his expression into something that looked almost like physical pain. His voice cracked. His voice. "That's not possible. The acquisition isn't... I didn't..." "The acquisition closes officially on January 2nd. Maya said, her voice calm and conversational. "But the paperwork was signed 3 weeks ago. I've had access to all company files, including employee records, since December 10th. She walked toward him slowly, her hands clasped in front of her. 7 complaints, Derek. 7 people who stood where I stood tonight and experienced what I experienced. 7 people whose stories were dismissed, whose pain was filed away, whose dignity was sacrificed so that you could keep wearing that uniform." Derek's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. "I read every single complaint this evening." Maya's voice was steady, each word landing like a stone. "Maria Santos, James Washington, Dr. Oluwole Adeyemi, Patricia Huang, Clarence Johnson, Aisha Mohammed, Robert and Dolores Freeman." She paused after each name, letting them land. "Do you remember any of them? Do their faces come back to you when you close your eyes at night? Or have you forgotten them entirely the way you assumed you would forget me?" Derek shook his head. But it wasn't a denial. It was the gesture of a man who was beginning to understand the scope of what he had done, who was watching the foundations of his self-image crumble beneath his feet. I didn't. His voice was barely a whisper. I was just doing my job. I was just following protocol. There is no protocol that requires you to tear up a passenger's boarding pass, Maya said. There is no protocol that requires you to make someone wait 20 minutes while you process everyone else. There is no protocol that justifies telling a customer that people like them don't belong in first class. There is no protocol that excuses suggesting they take the bus. She stopped directly in front of him, close enough to see the sweat beading on his forehead. So let's be honest with each other, Derek. This wasn't about protocol. This wasn't about security. This wasn't about fraud prevention. This was about power. You saw a black woman in a wool coat standing in the first-class line, and you decided that she couldn't possibly belong there. You decided that she must be a fraud, a criminal, someone who needed to be put in her place. And you enjoyed it. You enjoyed making me wait. You enjoyed watching me stand there while you helped everyone else. You enjoyed tearing up my ticket. I could see it in your face. I could hear it in your voice. Derek's legs seemed to give out. He stumbled backward, catching himself on the arm of a chair, then sinking into it like a man who had just been told he had a terminal illness. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know. You didn't know I was the owner." Maya's voice was sharp. Would it have mattered? Would you have treated me differently if you'd known I had power? If you'd known I could end your career with a single phone call? Yes. Derek's voice was barely audible. No. He looked up at her, his eyes wet, his face contorted with something that might have been genuine anguish. I don't know. I don't know who I am anymore. I don't know how I became this person. The room was silent. Harold Patterson was staring at the floor. Olivia Thornton stood rigid by the door, her professional mask firmly in place. Janet Morrison watched from the window, her expression unreadable. The young woman with the tablet had stopped typing. Maya studied the man in front of her. This man who had tried to humiliate her, who had succeeded for a few moments in making her feel like she didn't belong, who had torn up her ticket and laughed while he did it. She thought about her grandmother, about the hotel guests who had looked through Lillian Carter like she was invisible, about the countless small cruelties that Lillian had absorbed without complaint, storing them away in some deep place where they couldn't touch her essential dignity. She thought about her mother sitting in a wheelchair in an apartment in Atlanta, waiting for her daughter to come home for what might be their last New Year together. Evelyn Carter, who had taught Maya that anger was a fire that consumed the vessel carrying it more than anything it was aimed at. She thought about the 7 people whose complaints had been dismissed. About all the people whose complaints were never filed at all because they knew it wouldn't make any difference. About all the quiet humiliations that never made it into any record. And then Maya Carter did something that surprised everyone in the room, including herself. She pulled her grandmother's handkerchief from her pocket and held it out to Derek Walsh. "Wipe your face," she said quietly. "You're a mess." Derek stared at the handkerchief like it was a foreign object, like he couldn't understand why the woman he had just humiliated was offering him comfort. His hand trembled as he reached out and took it. He pressed it to his face and sobbed, his shoulders shaking, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Maya let him cry. She didn't speak, didn't move, just stood there, while the man who had tried to destroy her dignity wept into her grandmother's handkerchief. The crying lasted for several minutes. Nobody in the room spoke. The only sounds were Derek's sobs and the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant rumble of planes taking off into the night. When his sobs finally subsided, Maya spoke again. "I'm not going to fire you tonight, Derek." His head snapped up, confusion and disbelief warring on his tear-stained face. "What I'm going to do," Maya continued, "is give you a choice. You can resign right now, walk out of this airport, and never work in the airline industry again. Or you can accept a suspension, participate in an investigation, and commit to a transformation program that I'm going to design specifically for employees who have demonstrated the kind of behavior you displayed tonight." Derek blinked, his eyes red and swollen. Why would you do that after what I did to you?" Maya reached down and gently took her grandmother's handkerchief back from his hands. She looked at it for a moment, at the embroidered initials that had witnessed so much over the decades. "Because my grandmother taught me that grace is not weakness," she said quietly. "It's the ultimate power. You can destroy someone with anger, or you can transform them with dignity." She looked back at Derek. "I choose transformation. Not for your sake, for the sake of every passenger who will come through these doors after tonight. If I just fire you, this company hires someone else. Maybe better, maybe worse. But the system that allowed you to operate this way for 6 years, that stays exactly the same." She stepped back, giving Derek space. "I'm not interested in making an example of one person. I'm interested in changing the entire system. And that means giving people a chance to be part of the solution instead of remaining part of the problem." Derek sat in silence for a long moment. The tears had stopped, but his face was still wet, his eyes still red. Something was happening behind those eyes, some kind of internal calculation or struggle that Maya couldn't see. Then slowly, he slid off the chair and onto his knees. "I'll do it," he said, his voice raw. "Whatever you want. I'll do whatever it takes." Maya nodded once. "Good. Then here's what's going to happen. You're suspended immediately without pay pending a full investigation. Every complaint against you will be examined by an independent review board. And if that board determines that you're capable of change, you'll enter a program that includes intensive bias training, community service, and supervised customer interactions for a minimum of 1 year." She paused. "But understand this clearly. This isn't mercy. This is accountability. And if you fail at any point in this process, if you demonstrate that you're unable or unwilling to change, you will be terminated and you will never work for any company I own or influence again. Ever." Derek nodded frantically. Yes, I understand. Thank you. Thank you so much. Don't thank me yet." Maya's voice hardened. "Thank the 7 people whose complaints were ignored. Thank all the passengers whose experiences were dismissed because they didn't have the power to force accountability. Your transformation program will include meeting with some of them, if they're willing. You'll hear their stories directly. You'll understand the real impact of what you've done." Derek's face crumpled again, but this time there was something different in his expression. Something that looked almost like genuine recognition. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry for all of it." Maya studied him for a long moment. Then she said quietly, "Apologies are words. Transformation is action. Show me action, Derek. Show everyone. She turned to Olivia. I want company-wide changes implemented immediately. Mandatory bias training for every employee developed in partnership with outside experts. An independent review board to examine all customer complaints with real authority to recommend discipline. Passenger advocates at every major gate empowered to intervene in real time when they witness potential discrimination. She paused. And I want every single complaint that was previously dismissed to be reopened and reinvestigated. Every one. I want the people who filed those complaints to be contacted and informed of what we're doing. I want them to know that their voices finally matter. Olivia nodded, already taking notes on her phone. I'll have an implementation plan on your desk by January 2nd. Maya looked around the room one final time. At Derek, still kneeling on the floor, his face wet with tears. At Harold Patterson, who looked like he had just witnessed something he didn't quite understand. At the young woman with the tablet who had tears running down her own cheeks. At Janet Morrison, who was nodding slowly, a small smile playing at the corners of her lips. And at her grandmother's handkerchief, still clutched in her own hand. I have a plane to catch, Maya said. My mother is waiting. She walked toward the door, then paused and turned back. Janet, I'm going to need someone I can trust on the ground here. Someone who knows this airport, knows its problems, knows its people. Someone who isn't afraid to speak up when something is wrong. She met Janet's eyes. Would you be interested in a new position, Director of Passenger Advocacy? You'd report directly to my office. You'd have the authority to intervene in any situation where you believe a passenger is being mistreated. And you'd have my full backing. Janet stared at her for a long moment. Then she smiled a real smile, the first one Maya had seen from her all night. I'd be honored, Ms. Carter. Good. Maya nodded once. We'll talk details after the new year. For now, make sure Mr. Walsh is processed according to suspension protocol, and make sure the passengers who witnessed what happened tonight know that their stories matter, that someone is listening. She turned and walked out of the room. The terminal was different when Maya walked back through it. News of what had happened had spread through the airport like wildfire. People recognized her now, pointing and whispering. Some held up their phones, still recording. Others approached her, wanting to shake her hand, to thank her for what she had done, to tell their own stories of similar humiliations. An elderly black woman in a wheelchair was being pushed toward her by a younger woman who might have been her daughter. Maya recognized her immediately from the description in one of the dismissed complaint files. Mrs. Freeman, Maya asked, stopping in front of her. The woman looked up, her eyes widening. You know my name, I read your complaint. Maya knelt down so she was at eye level with the woman. I'm so sorry for what happened to you. What Derek Walsh did was wrong, and what this company did by ignoring your complaint was even more wrong. I'm going to make sure it never happens again. Dolores Freeman's eyes filled with tears. He made my husband feel like a criminal, she said quietly. Robert served 30 years in the Air Force, 30 years defending this country. He flew combat missions in Vietnam. He trained pilots for Desert Storm, and that man made him feel like he didn't have the right to fly first class, like he had to prove that he belonged. Maya took the woman's hand. Where's Robert now? He passed. Dolores's voice cracked. 6 months ago. Heart attack. But before that, he never forgot what happened that day. It haunted him. Made him feel like all those years of service didn't matter, like nothing he did would ever be enough to make him equal in some people's eyes. Maya squeezed her hand tightly. They mattered. He mattered, and I promise you his story will be part of the change we're making, No one will forget what men like Derek Walsh have done, and no one will be allowed to do it again. Dolores Freeman nodded slowly, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for listening. Maya stood up, her throat tight with emotion. She looked at Dolores's daughter. Make sure your mother gets home safely, and please send your contact information to my office. I'd like to stay in touch. I'd like your mother to be part of the change we're building. She continued toward the gate, but every few steps someone else stopped her. A young black man in a business suit who had been on the same flight, who had watched the confrontation from a distance and felt helpless to intervene. A Latina mother with 2 children who had witnessed everything and wanted Maya to know that she had taught her daughters an important lesson tonight. A white teenager who just wanted to say that what she'd done was really cool, that he'd never seen anyone stand up to someone like that before. And then, just before she reached the departure gate, a voice cut through the crowd. Ms. Carter. Maya turned. Marcus Chen, the young gate agent, who had watched everything from the sidelines, who had questioned Derek's behavior, who had been shut down when he tried to intervene. Ms. Carter. I just wanted to say... He stopped in front of her, slightly out of breath. I wanted to say that I'm sorry. I saw what was happening and I knew it was wrong, but I didn't. I wasn't brave enough to. You weren't sure you had the authority to stop it. Maya's voice was gentle. Marcus nodded miserably. I should have done more. I should have said something to a supervisor. I should have called security. I should have... Marcus? Maya held up a hand. Look at me. He looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and guilty. You're 28 years old. You've been at this job for less than a year. You saw a senior employee doing something wrong and you were afraid of the consequences of challenging him. Maya paused. That's human. That's normal. And that's exactly why systems need to change. Because we can't rely on junior employees to be heroes when the culture punishes people for speaking up. She put a hand on his shoulder. What I need from you going forward is this. When you see something wrong, report it. Not to the person doing it. To someone outside the chain of command. We're going to create channels for that. Ways for employees to raise concerns without fear of retaliation. And I need people like you to use them. Marcus nodded, some of the guilt in his expression fading. I will. I promise. I won't let you down. Good. Maya gave his shoulder a final squeeze. Now go back to work. And know that you're part of the change. She turned and walked toward her gate, where a new boarding pass was waiting for her. Olivia had arranged everything. First class, window seat, no questions asked. As she settled into her seat, Maya pulled out her phone. Dozens of notifications, news alerts about an incident at Charlotte Douglas Airport, social media posts going viral, interview requests from major networks. She ignored all of it. Instead, she opened her text messages and typed a single line to her mother. On my way home. Can't wait to see you. The response came almost immediately. Hurry up, baby. The champagne is chilling. Maya smiled and put her phone away. Outside the window, the lights of Charlotte began to shrink as the plane climbed into the dark December sky. The plane touched down in Atlanta just after 11 p.m. Maya collected her bag and walked through the terminal, past the baggage claim, through the sliding doors, into the cold December night. A car was waiting for her. Not a limousine. Just a simple sedan driven by a woman named Patricia, who had been working for Maya's mother for 15 years. Mrs. Maya Patricia's face lit up as she hurried around to open the passenger door. "Your mama's been watching the news. She knows what happened." Maya sighed as she climbed in. "Of course she does. She's proud of you." Patricia pulled out of the pickup lane. "She said you handled it just like your grandma would have." The drive to her mother's apartment took 20 minutes. Maya spent most of it staring out the window, watching the familiar streets of Atlanta slide past. She had grown up in this city, had learned to ride a bike on these sidewalks, had kissed her first boyfriend under that old oak tree in Piedmont Park, had sat in that diner with her grandmother eating pancakes and listening to stories about the old days. So much had changed since then, and so much had stayed exactly the same. Evelyn Carter's apartment building was modest, but well-maintained, a red brick structure that had been standing since the 1960s. Maya had offered many times to move her mother somewhere bigger, somewhere with better medical facilities nearby, somewhere that wasn't a third-floor walk-up, with an elevator that only worked half the time. Every time Evelyn had refused. "This is my home," she always said. "This is where I raised you. This is where your daddy and I danced in the kitchen on Sunday mornings. This is where I'm going to stay." Maya climbed the stairs slowly, her legs tired from the long day, her heart heavy with everything that was coming. The door to apartment 3C was slightly ajar, warm light spilling out into the hallway. She pushed it open and stepped inside. Her mother was sitting in her wheelchair by the window, wrapped in a blanket that Maya recognized from her childhood. The TV was on muted, showing footage of what had happened at the airport. And on the table beside her sat 2 glasses of champagne already poured. Evelyn turned her head, and despite the illness that had aged her so much in the past year, her smile was still the same. Bright, warm, full of love. "There's my girl." Maya crossed the room in 3 steps and knelt beside her mother's chair, wrapping her arms around the woman who had given her everything. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. They just held each other the way they had when Maya was 7 years old, and the world seemed too big and too scary and too cruel. Finally, Evelyn spoke. "I saw what you did." Maya pulled back, wiping her eyes. "Yeah, it was quite a night. You gave him the handkerchief." Evelyn's voice was soft with wonder. "You gave him your grandmother's handkerchief." Maya nodded. "I almost didn't. I wanted to hurt him, Mama. I wanted to use every bit of power I have to destroy him. But you didn't." "No." Maya sat back on her heels. "I remembered what Grandma always said, about how the world is full of people who want to make you small, and you have to decide whether to let them or to become so big that their smallness can't touch you." Evelyn reached out and touched her daughter's face. "Your grandmother would be proud, so proud, but she also would have told you to stand up, get off that floor, and drink your champagne before it goes flat." Maya laughed, a real laugh, the first one in what felt like forever. She stood up and took the glass her mother offered her. "To Grandma Lillian," Maya said, raising her glass. "To Lillian." Evelyn's voice cracked slightly. "And to all the ones who came before her, and all the ones coming after." They touched glasses and drank. Outside the window, fireworks had begun to explode over the Atlanta skyline. It was midnight. A new year was beginning. Maya and her mother sat together watching the colors bloom and fade against the dark sky, not speaking, just being present in the moment, in the love that had sustained them through so much. in the hope that still flickered even in the darkest times. The champagne was warm by the time they finished it. The fireworks had faded. The city had grown quiet. Evelyn's eyes were heavy, the medication pulling her toward sleep. Maya helped her into bed, tucking the blankets around her, the way her mother had done for her when she was small. "Stay," Evelyn whispered. "Stay until I fall asleep. I'm not going anywhere, Mama. I promise." Maya sat beside the bed, holding her mother's hand, watching her drift into sleep. The room was quiet, except for the soft rhythm of Evelyn's breathing, and the distant sound of New Year's celebrations still echoing through the city. She pulled out her grandmother's handkerchief and held it up to the light. The fabric was worn now. The embroidery was fading. But the letters were still visible. GLC. Grandma Lillian Carter. A woman who had cleaned hotel rooms and raised children and never stopped believing that her granddaughter could be something more. "I hope you saw it," Grandma Maya whispered into the silence. "I hope you saw what your handkerchief did tonight." She refolded it carefully and pressed it to her heart. And in the quiet of that moment, in the space between 1 year and the next, she made a promise. She would build something bigger than herself, something that would outlast her, something that would make sure that no one else ever had to stand in a line and be told they didn't belong. That was her grandmother's legacy. That was her mother's hope. And that was the work she had been put on this earth to do. The months that followed were the busiest of Maya Carter's life. In January, she officially took control of Horizon Airlines, implementing the changes she had announced on New Year's Eve. The bias training program launched with a 94% participation rate. The Independent Review Board began examining backlogged complaints, eventually uncovering patterns of discrimination at multiple airports in the network. Some employees were terminated. Others were retrained. The culture began to shift slowly, but perceptibly. Derek Walsh completed his suspension and entered the transformation program. Maya received regular reports on his progress from Janet Morrison, who had taken to her new role with dedication and purpose. She never responded to the reports directly. She didn't need to. This wasn't about him as an individual. It was about the system that had allowed him to operate the way he did for so long. In February, the videos from New Year's Eve went viral again after a major news network ran a feature story on the incident. Maya gave one interview, just one, and used it to talk not about herself, but about the changes the company was making, about the importance of accountability, about the need for systemic reform across the entire airline industry. The interview was watched by 12 million people. In March, Evelyn Carter's condition worsened. Maya flew home every weekend, spending hours at her mother's bedside, reading to her, holding her hand, listening to stories she had heard 100 times before, but never tired of hearing. On March 23rd, at 3:47 in the morning, Evelyn Carter passed away peacefully in her sleep. Maya was holding her hand. The funeral was held in the same church where Maya had been baptized, where her parents had been married, where her grandmother had sung in the choir for 30 years. Maya delivered the eulogy with her grandmother's handkerchief in her pocket, pressing its familiar weight against her heart when the words became hard to find. Evelyn Carter was a school teacher, Maya told the gathered mourners. She taught 4th grade for 35 years, shaping hundreds of young minds, never earning more than $32,000 a year at her peak. She never owned a house. She never flew first class until I bought her a ticket. She never saw her name in a newspaper or her face on television. She paused, looking out at the faces of people who had loved her mother. But she raised me to believe that I could do all of those things. She worked 2 jobs so I could go to college. She sacrificed her own dreams so I could pursue mine. And when I succeeded, when I started building something bigger than either of us had imagined, do you know what she said? Maya's voice cracked. She said, "Don't forget where you came from, and don't forget the ones who can't get where you're going." She looked down at her hands. That's her legacy. Not me. Not the money, or the buildings, or the accomplishments. The reminder that no matter how far we climb, we're standing on the shoulders of people who never got the recognition they deserved. And our job, our sacred obligation, is to reach back while we reach forward, to lift up the ones coming behind us, to make sure that the doors that were opened for us stay open for everyone. She looked up at the ceiling. I love you, Mama. And I promise, I'll never forget. 1 year after the incident at Charlotte Douglas Airport, Maya Carter stood in the lobby of a brand new building in Atlanta. The sign above the door read Lillian Carter Center for Leadership and Equity. Behind her, a crowd of dignitaries and community leaders and ordinary citizens had gathered for the grand opening. The center had been her mother's idea, conceived in those final months, as they sat together watching the news coverage and reading the letters that had started pouring in from people all over the country. People who had been inspired by Maya's story. People who wanted to know how they could make a difference in their own communities. People who needed a place where they could learn the skills to fight back against injustice. Maya approached the podium, looking out at the faces before her. She saw teenagers from local high schools who would be the center's first scholarship recipients. She saw small business owners who had struggled against discrimination their whole lives. She saw Dolores Freeman in the front row, finally smiling after a year of grief. And in the back of the room, standing quietly near the door, she saw Derek Walsh. He had completed the transformation program 3 months ago. He had done his community service, his training, his supervised interactions with passengers from all backgrounds. He had written letters of apology to every person whose complaint had been dismissed during his tenure. Most hadn't responded. Some had written back with anger and pain. A few had agreed to meet with him to let him see the real impact of his actions. He had asked through intermediaries if there was any way he could help with the center. Maya had thought about it for a long time before saying yes. 1 year ago, Maya began her voice carrying through the crowd. I stood in an airport and watched a man tear up my boarding pass. He told me that people like me don't belong in first class. He thought he was putting me in my place. She paused. He was wrong. She gestured to the building around her. He was wrong because there is no limit to what we can become. Not because of anything inherent in us, but because of the communities that lift us up, the teachers who believe in us, the ancestors who sacrificed for us. I am not standing here today because I am exceptional. I am standing here because Lillian Carter cleaned hotel rooms for 40 years and never stopped believing that her granddaughter could be something more. I am standing here because Evelyn Carter taught 4th grade for 35 years and poured all of her dreams into her only child. I am standing here because 100 people whose names I will never know made it possible for people like me to walk through doors that used to be closed. She looked directly at Derek Walsh. I am also standing here because 1 year ago, I chose transformation over destruction. I chose to believe that the man who tried to humiliate me was capable of change. She let that sit for a moment. I'm not going to tell you that Derek Walsh is a different person now. That's not for me to say. That's something he has to prove every day for the rest of his life through his actions. But what I can tell you is that he's trying, and that's more than many people ever do. She turned back to the crowd. That's what this center is about. Creating conditions for change, giving young people the tools and the opportunities and the support they need to become whoever they are meant to be. And reminding all of us that no one is beyond redemption if they're willing to do the work. She pulled her grandmother's handkerchief from her pocket, holding it up so everyone could see the embroidered initials that had witnessed so much. My grandmother gave me this handkerchief when I was 7 years old. She told me to keep it with me whenever the world tried to make me feel small, to fold my dignity into something they couldn't touch. Maya pressed the handkerchief to her heart. I've carried it with me every day for 35 years. And today I want to pass on what it represents. Not this specific piece of cloth, but the knowledge it carries. The knowledge that you belong, that your dignity is inherent and inviolable, that no one can tear up your value unless you let them. She looked at the teenagers in the front row. So go out there and be magnificent. Build businesses and write laws and create art and raise families and change the world. And when someone tells you that you don't belong, when someone tries to make you small, when someone tears up your ticket, you look them in the eye and you remember. She stepped back from the podium. You remember that Lillian Carter cleaned hotel rooms for 40 years and her granddaughter became a CEO. You remember that Maya Carter had her boarding pass torn in half, and she turned that moment into a movement. You remember that every obstacle you face is an opportunity to prove them wrong. She looked out at the crowd one last time. And you remember that you are never alone. We are all standing with you. Your ancestors, your community, your future. All of us together. The applause began, but Maya wasn't listening. She was looking at the back of the room where Derek Walsh was quietly wiping tears from his face. She was looking at Dolores Freeman in the front row, clapping with hands that had finally found peace. She was looking at the teenagers who would walk through these doors tomorrow and every day after carrying the promise of a future that Lillian Carter had dreamed of but never lived to see. This was her grandmother's legacy. This was her mother's hope. This was the work she had been put on this earth to do, and it was only just beginning. That night, Maya returned to her mother's old apartment one last time. She had kept it for a year, unable to let go, needing a place where she could still feel close to the women who had shaped her. But now it was time. She walked through the rooms slowly, touching the familiar furniture, looking at the photos on the walls, remembering the voices that had once filled these spaces with love and laughter and the kind of wisdom that only comes from lived experience. In her mother's bedroom, she found a letter on the nightstand. It had been there since Evelyn died, waiting for Maya to be ready to read it. She sat down on the bed and opened it. My dearest Maya Bell, if you're reading this, I'm gone. And knowing you, you've probably been too busy changing the world to sit down and grieve properly. So stop what you're doing, make yourself a cup of tea, and let your mama talk to you one last time. I've spent the last few months watching you become everything I always knew you could be. Not because of the money or the power or the buildings with your name on them, but because of the way you carry yourself, the way you treat people, the way you remember where you came from while you reach for where you're going. Your grandmother would be so proud. I know I've told you that 1,000 times, but it's true. She used to say that she was planting seeds she'd never see grow. Well, baby, you're the harvest. You're everything she dreamed about when she was scrubbing toilets and making beds and counting pennies to make sure we had food on the table. But I want to tell you something else. Something I maybe should have said more often when I was alive. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to save everyone. You don't have to carry the weight of the world on your shoulders just because you're strong enough to bear it. It's okay to rest. It's okay to grieve. It's okay to let other people carry some of the load. Your grandmother taught you to be strong. I hope I taught you that it's also okay to be soft sometimes, to let people in, to accept help when it's offered, to love without reservation even when it's scary. That handkerchief you carry everywhere, it's a reminder of where you came from. But don't forget to look at where you're going. Don't let the past become a prison. Let it be a foundation. I love you more than words can say. I have loved you from the moment you took your first breath, and I will love you long after I've taken my last. Now dry your eyes, finish your tea, and go do something wonderful. Your Mama. Maya read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. Then she folded it carefully, placed it in her pocket next to her grandmother's handkerchief, and stood up. She walked to the window and looked out at the city lights. "I hear you, Mama," she whispered. "I hear you." She turned off the lights, closed the door, and walked out of the apartment for the last time. Outside, the city was alive with the sounds of the night. Traffic and music and voices and laughter. The endless symphony of human existence. Maya hailed a cab and gave the driver the address of her hotel. As the city slipped past outside the window, she pulled out her grandmother's handkerchief and held it in her palm. Then slowly, deliberately, she folded it into a perfect square and tucked it into her pocket. Not because she didn't need it anymore, but because she finally understood that she didn't need to hold on to it so tightly. The strength it represented wasn't in the fabric. It was in her. It had been there all along. If this story made you think about dignity, about power, about the choice between destruction and transformation, share it. Not for views or likes, but because somewhere out there, someone is standing in a line being told they don't belong. And they need to know that they do. They always have.